There is a tiny aquatic plant that multiplies at a shocking rate. Every 48 hours, its mass doubles. No special labs. No controlled environments. Put it in any calm water, and it takes off. What starts as a small scoop becomes 2 in 2 days, 4 in 4 days. Within a week, it can cover a bathtub. In a month, it can weigh over a ton. That's not hype, that's pure math. Its growth is so extreme that researchers rank it as the fastest growing plant on the planet. But rapid growth isn't what makes it extraordinary. By dry weight, nearly half of this plant is protein, around 45%. Compare that to eggs at roughly 12%, beef at 26%, or chicken at about 31%. This plant outperforms them all. And it's not a partial protein that needs pairing with other foods. It's complete. All 9 essential amino acids, in proportions the human body can actually use. 1 square meter of water, 30 days of growth, and you can generate enough protein to sustain a person for an entire month. No soil. No fertilizer. No machinery. No irrigation systems. No pesticides. No back-breaking labor. Just water, sunlight, and harvesting. Scientifically, it belongs to the genus Lemna. Most people know it as duckweed. That thin green layer floating on ponds and ditches, the stuff people wrinkle their noses at, isn't slime or waste. It's the most efficient protein-producing system humans have ever identified. An acre of duckweed yields roughly 10 times more protein than an acre of soybeans, and about 20 times more than corn. Nothing in conventional agriculture comes close to its speed. And there's more. As it grows, duckweed cleans water. It pulls nitrogen and phosphorus out of runoff. It absorbs heavy metals. Polluted agricultural wastewater becomes cleaner, while the plant turns those pollutants into edible biomass. Food production and water purification happen at the same time. A plant that grows almost anywhere. Needs almost nothing. Produces complete protein faster than any crop in history. And improves the environment as a side effect. By all logic, it should be everywhere, in backyards, on rooftops, in community gardens, refugee settlements, and food-insecure regions. Yet in much of the developed world, cultivating it is restricted or outright banned. It's labeled invasive. A pest. Something to destroy. But some cultures never forgot its value. Across Southeast Asia, duckweed has been eaten for generations. In Thailand, it's known as phum. In Myanmar, yakayan. In Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, it has been collected from rice fields since long before written history. This was never survival food. It was simply food. This was never a last resort food or something eaten in hard times. Duckweed was a primary protein source for societies that flourished for thousands of years. Some of the earliest mentions appear in Chinese farming records dating back to around 200 BCE. Farmers didn't know the science behind it, but they paid attention to outcomes. Ponds covered with duckweed produced healthier fish. Rice fields that supported it required fewer added nutrients. Animals fed with it gained weight faster and stayed stronger. They didn't talk about nitrogen cycles or amino acids. They simply observed what worked, and expanded it. Across Asia, whole food systems developed around this plant. Duckweed floated on the surface of rice paddies. Fish lived underneath, feeding on the excess. Chickens and pigs consumed the harvested plants along the edges. Animal waste returned nutrients to the water. Duckweed absorbed them again. No outside inputs. No waste. A closed-loop system that fed entire populations for centuries. When European travelers arrived in Southeast Asia, they were stunned. A Portuguese missionary writing in 1590 described villages producing meat without grazing land. He couldn't explain how protein seemed to come from green water. Yet the system was real, proven, and relied upon by millions. Then colonial rule disrupted everything. European agricultural thinking had no place for pond-based farming or integrated aquatic systems. It favored land ownership, single-crop farming, and purchased fertilizers. Wetlands were drained. Diverse local food systems were dismantled. Rice became an export commodity rather than part of a balanced diet. Duckweed cultivation was dismissed as backward. Within a few generations, knowledge that had supported entire civilizations began to fade. But it didn't vanish everywhere. In Bangladesh, the poorest communities continued growing it out of necessity. In rural Myanmar, families kept small ponds behind their homes. In the Mekong Delta, elderly farmers still remembered how it once worked. The practice survived on the margins, among people too poor to abandon effective systems, and too remote to be fully absorbed into modern agriculture. They continued cultivating the fastest protein source on Earth, while the rest of the world learned to call it a weed. Modern science eventually caught up. In 1985, NASA began studying duckweed while searching for ideal crops for space missions. The criteria were strict: rapid growth in limited space, complete nutrition, wastewater recycling, and oxygen production. Duckweed met every requirement. The findings, published in Advances in Space Research, surprised even the researchers. Protein content reached about 45% by dry weight. Biomass doubled roughly every 2 days. Nitrogen removal from water approached 99%. No other plant performed at the same level. Later analysis at NASA's Kennedy Space Center calculated its potential yield. A single hectare of duckweed could generate up to 140 tons of dry protein per year. Soybeans, by comparison, produce less than 1 ton per hectare annually, making duckweed roughly 140 times more productive. In 2009, researchers at Rutgers University examined its amino acid profile. Their results, published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, showed that duckweed protein nearly perfectly matches FAO standards for human nutrition. The only amino acid present at slightly lower levels was methionine, and even then, it still exceeded minimum dietary requirements. This wasn't livestock-grade feed. This was protein suitable for humans. Researchers at the University of Gießen in Germany pushed the question further by conducting controlled human trials. Participants were fed duckweed directly. Digestibility reached 93%. Protein absorption matched what's seen with eggs. The flavor was described as mild, with a subtle nut-like note. No negative health effects were recorded. When the study was published in 2014, its conclusion was clear: duckweed is safe and appropriate for direct human consumption. Then attention turned to water treatment. Scientists at the Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology showed that duckweed could remove roughly 95% of nitrogen and about 70% of phosphorus from wastewater. The plant didn't merely survive in polluted water, it actively consumed the pollution. A pilot program in Dhaka took the idea into the real world. Sewage flowed through duckweed-filled lagoons. The water that emerged was clean enough for agricultural use. The harvested plants were sent to nearby fish farms. Those fish were then sold in local markets. Pollution was converted into food. Protein production costs dropped below 10 cents per kilogram. In 2019, the World Bank commissioned a large-scale review. Researchers examined 17 years of duckweed research across 12 countries. The final report ran 40 pages, but its message was simple: duckweed is the most resource-efficient protein source available to humanity. By that point, the science was no longer in dispute. The data was decisive. The implications were staggering. So why isn't it everywhere? Why isn't it sold alongside lentils and rice? Why have most people never even heard its name? In the United States, duckweed is officially listed as an aquatic nuisance species in 37 states. Growing it often requires permits. Transporting it across state borders can lead to fines. In some regions, possessing it at all is illegal. The stated justification is environmental protection. Duckweed spreads quickly. It can blanket ponds, block sunlight and disrupt existing ecosystems. All of that is true. But it's also true of nearly every crop humans have ever relied on. Wheat spreads aggressively. Corn crowds out native species. Soy farming has destroyed massive ecosystems worldwide. Modern agriculture has converted over 1 billion acres of wild land into monocultures. None of those were banned. Duckweed is different. It doesn't depend on patented seeds. It doesn't need synthetic fertilizer. It doesn't require chemical pesticides or expensive machinery. Anyone can start growing it with a simple container, water, sunlight, and a small starter culture from a pond. And that, more than anything else, is the real issue. The global animal feed industry generates more than $400 billion every year. Soy protein sits at the center of that system, with corn filling the gaps. Both depend on massive infrastructure. Both require yearly seed purchases. Both rely on fertilizers, chemicals, fuel, and complex supply chains. Duckweed needs none of it. It costs almost nothing to grow. It expands faster than centralized distribution systems can accommodate. If widely adopted, it would render much of the existing feed industry unnecessary. The same dynamic exists in the human protein market. Whey protein alone represents a $20 billion industry. Powders, bars, and shakes are built on heavy processing, branding, and premium pricing. Duckweed protein costs less to produce than the container it would be sold in. Environmental regulation offers a convenient justification. Labeling duckweed as invasive effectively blocks large-scale cultivation. Permits introduce delays and costs. Startups attempting to commercialize it face years of regulatory review. Meanwhile, the plant that could ease global protein shortages floats freely on ponds across the country, legally defined as a nuisance and locked out of the market. And those who would benefit most, small farmers, food-insecure communities, and developing regions, are told it is too dangerous to grow. Too dangerous. A plant safely eaten for over 3,000 years. Too dangerous. A plant NASA selected for astronaut nutrition. Too dangerous. A plant the World Bank identified as the most resource-efficient protein source known to humanity. These regulations are not primarily protecting ecosystems. They are protecting profit margins. The cost shows up in overpriced protein, exhausted soil, and polluted waterways. You are rarely told the full truth. Most duckweed restrictions apply to commercial operations and natural waterways. They do not apply to closed systems on private property. A plastic tub in a backyard is not a regulated ecosystem. A stock tank on a patio is not an industrial farm. A small pool on a balcony is not subject to aquatic nuisance laws. In most places, duckweed can be grown legally in contained setups. Getting started costs less than $20. One container. Water. A small starter culture. That's it. Within 2 weeks, production exceeds most household needs. Duckweed can be dried and milled into protein powder. It can be fed to chickens, increasing egg omega-3 content by roughly 30%. It works as fish feed in small aquaponic systems. It can be added fresh to soups, salads, or blended foods. 1 square meter of surface area can generate more than a kilogram of protein each month. The advanced uses are even more compelling. Duckweed can treat household gray water. It can clean nutrient-rich waste from fish tanks. It can convert nitrogen runoff into edible biomass instead of environmental damage. Fully closed-loop protein systems can operate with virtually no ongoing costs. This isn't hypothetical. Homesteaders in Florida grow duckweed to feed tilapia that feed their families. Urban growers in Detroit use it to supplement chicken feed and cut expenses in half. Permaculture projects across the developing world have quietly integrated duckweed into resilient food systems. The knowledge continues spreading, despite regulation, despite the absence of commercial backing, despite deliberate neglect. Because once people understand the numbers, they can't ignore them. 45% protein. Biomass that doubles every 2 days. Complete amino acids. No external inputs. This isn't a supplement. It's a structural shift. The industrial food system teaches dependence. That protein must be expensive, that food requires constant inputs, that survival depends on supply chains you don't control. Duckweed tells a different story. A story of abundance without permission. Protein without corporations. Food sovereignty in a simple container. It already grows on nearly every warm water surface. The infrastructure exists everywhere, waiting to be used. The only real barrier is awareness. Now you have it. A handful of duckweed. A container of water. 2 weeks of patience. That's the distance between scarcity and lasting abundance. The most efficient protein source on Earth is floating in ditches while you're told to buy processed alternatives. It's time to stop asking permission. The green film everyone learned to dismiss is still there, and it's ready to change everything.